Okay, and the first, it was fascinating to me because you see this whole thing playing out in SDS and other organizations. And, you know, by 70, 71, why, they're pretty much marginalized. MCHR had a rebirth and had more members in 71 and 72 under the leadership of Quentin Young of Chicago. And Quentin, in his 80s, is still very active. He was the co-founder of Physicians for a National Health Program, and you see him all the time now coming out for single-payer insurance, which unfortunately will not happen, at least now. But the organization then was a major player and then begins its decline from about 72 to 77 or 78. So I could look at it year by year and see how gradually you had a more radical group coming in, a group that is more influenced by the thoughts of Chairman Mao. It's having lived through that period, it was difficult for me not to be cynical at times. I mean, this was a time when politically correct was not used with irony, and you'd read about it and you'd see at the very end why the Los Angeles chapter of MCHR was having a mass meeting in somebody's basement with 8 people there debating which would be the proper slogans with which to reach the masses. So you have it going back to then. And Walter Lear, who was really present at the creation, was the only person who remained there through all of this. And you would see him in these meetings in the 70s or the notes, and, you know, what's this old guy doing here? Well, he was 50 at the time. And Walter was insisting that I tell the whole story, and he was saying, you know, we did things in the early days. We were active in the Bakke case. We were doing that. But the more I saw why the more discouraging it was. So I really held my breath when I sent my copy of the book to Walter. And I didn't know if he would approve of the way I was handling that. Well, one morning he had this big booming voice, and he said, "Great book, John." And then he said, "I can't believe I put up with all that shit for all those years." So yeah, it is interesting to see that dynamic and to see how people respond to it. And I got an email, a nice critical email from somebody who had been in MCHR during that time. And he said, "What you do, you tell the story of all the strife. You don't say that there was still some of those of us who were idealistic, who wanted to do these things in terms of improving health. And we were as appalled by what was going on as others." And that's a story that needs to be told as well. In terms of the oral history, I had to, it was different from doing Mississippi stuff. Those of you who have done oral history in sort of the movement of the 60s know that it's very difficult sometimes to get interviews, to get people to talk with you, because they have been interviewed to death by other people. They very often feel that they have been exploited and that their ideas have been taken out of context. I was fortunate because I had lived in Mississippi for 12 years before I decided to do this book. I'd already known some of the activists, and my being from Tougaloo was always an entree that people, especially white people from outside the South, did not have. In terms of the medical committee, it was very different. I would contact somebody and they would be delighted that I wanted to come see. They would take me out to lunch. They were so interested that somebody was interested in telling their story. And so yes, I did put off oral history. It wasn't because I really didn't want to know what their story was, but of course in all oral history, especially if you only have 1 or 2 shots at people, that you want to know as much as you can without sounding really dumb about, like some on this Nick listserv. Well, you'll get this. "Dear Mr. Moses, what did you do in the movement?" I'm writing my paper. Fascinating people, all with stories to tell, and some of them are just, one of my favorites was June Feiner, a physician from England, who came to this country to do her residency and was totally fearless. She is in one of the most famous photographs of the movement, was taken, let's see if I can, you can never find things when you want to find them. This was at a demonstration in Jackson in 1965. I couldn't find this for my other book, but this is a burly policeman who just died about a year or two ago, wresting an American flag away from this small boy. And in the photograph that wasn't, that I found, this is June Feiner, the nurse, or pardon me, the physician, who was comforting him afterwards. June was, of all the activists that sort of came down from the north, she was in the south the most. She was fearless. She would go into jails. She would face down unruly crowds, and had such a wonderful spirit about it. I had this good picture of her on the Selma March, and she was. They were talking. Of course, it was like every historian who was alive in 1965 marched with Martin. Well, it was the same thing with doctors. Only there were a lot of them, and of course most of them had nothing to do. They had, there was no violence on the march, so it had to do with mainly dealing with people's feet. Some people didn't have good shoes, some people had no shoes. And Tom Levin, who was just wonderful romantic, a Trotskyist and proud of it, said that he felt that the medical committee was the second Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and that the Spanish Civil War sort of defined his idea of the good life. And he was saying that, yes, he said, I would have such a wonderful time in the evening washing the feet of the poor instead of administering to the rich. And I didn't mention that, but I asked June Feiner about it, and she said, oh yes, she says, there was a podiatrist on the trip who was very useful. So all of these wonderful stories, and again, most of them, some of them have been interviewed in other books. There's a wonderful book by Deborah Schultz about Jewish women in the Civil Rights Movement. And there's some overlapping between June is interviewed there, and Trudy Weiss and several others. But for many of them, this was the excitement of it, that I was talking to people and getting their story, and they really hadn't told it to other people, at least that I knew of.